Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We're gonna get started. What happened? Joe, do you have a question? No? Okay. Does anybody else have a question?
Nice.
Okay, guys, we're gonna get started. Okay. Hang on one second. So first I just wanted to say thank you as always, but you know, when I remember back to like my days before I became Muslim, and I used to think about how regular my bouts with anxiety were, and I go back, like when I hear all of these lessons, because every single surah you talk about signs of lack of divinity, emptiness, hollowness, just like what happens to you when you don't have God in you, or faith, or something that anchors you to something beautiful. And it's a real lesson for me, because I just remember waking up every morning worried and hoping that today would be an okay day, that I wouldn't be hit with anxiety, I wouldn't be hit with depression, I wouldn't be, feeling just a lack of anchor, right? And so every single time you talk about that and you remind us that this is a sign, that it makes me feel so grateful that it's like I don't have, not to say I don't have anxiety. I mean, anxiety obviously is a normal part of life. But when I think about how much anxiety I had and how much my anchor was about anxiety and hope for happiness and these empty things that really don't mean anything and are like blowing on a dandelion. It's just gone, And so I just, like, every time you cover these issues in surahs, I just feel like, so grateful, and just like, it's almost like when you're watching a movie and the different pieces are coming together of the mystery, and you get to hear a little bit more and you go, oh, okay, I'm starting to get it. And like when that applies to your life and how you live life and your outlook and just your peace and state of mind, because when you have so much anxiety over every little thing, and then that actually can be replaced with peace, it means so much. And I think, like I've said before, like as a convert, because oftentimes you live in that darkness, you know what it is to live in darkness. And so when you actually are saved and plucked by God, and and allowed to become Muslim and allowed to experience light, you never want to go back, and you're so grateful every single time you are reminded of the darkness from which you came and the alternative. And I think that for converts especially, when you feel like there's no going back, I don't ever want to go back to that, and I just feel like, alhamdulillah, that there is an alternative that brings you peace. It's just and then now to be going chapter by chapter and learning another piece of the puzzle, and that it just gets better and it just gets more complete is such a blessing. So thank you, for personal.
Heritage Muslims, as you call them, heritage Muslims, need to experience that feeling of being born into once once you feel Allah, the feeling never leaves you. It is undeniable and unmistakable, and I feel the part that I get so many messages from young people who sit and they ask a million questions about, oh, I have doubt about this, and I have doubt about this, and I have doubt about that. And no matter what answers you give them, it's like treating symptoms, because they haven't felt Allah. They're approaching it completely from the wrong thing. It is not someone giving them an intelligent response to this event in the seerah of the Prophet, or that ayah or that something in their upbringing deny them the ability to feel God, and so they're approaching the whole thing from entirely the wrong. I wish everyone was a convert.
I believe everyone needs to be a convert, especially the heritage Muslims. Because it's, if you don't know that feeling, then I feel like you're really going in about it the wrong way. And like, it feels like it starts out as an intellectual journey, but you can't cross the barrier until your heart opens. And it's like your heart is only going to open if you are like talking to God, and like God allows you to feel that peace, you know? It's like finally connecting with a long lost friend, and there's like a familiarity that is so intuitive. And if you never have that touch of beauty or familiarity, or like, it's like coming home and to something that you've known forever. And I feel like if short of that, then you're just trying to create something intellectually, but that's not where it comes from. You agree? Thank you though. I mean, because I feel like also for converts, we can only go so far. Maybe everybody, right? You can only go so far with what you know, and then when you actually can access this deeper meaning in the Quran, which for someone like me is impossible. I don't know Arabic, and I know that I will not have the time in my life, or the you know, I can't learn Arabic, and certainly not to access this by myself. So this is the only path for me.
It makes you feel better. Most Arabic speakers, the vast majority of Arabic speakers, yeah, there are billions of, there are millions of Arabic speakers, and they're useless. So.
Anyway, alhamdulillah, thank you. Okay, so did you want to start, Shayan?
Are you going to announce the talk tomorrow?
Oh, yes, sorry, before we start, one more thing. Okay, yeah, so let me just announce, thank you for reminding me. Tomorrow, actually, the Sheikh is having a conversation hosted by Istanbul Zain University in Istanbul. And it's the Center for Islamic and Global Affairs, SIGA, C-I-G-A. So if you do a search online, this is Sami El Arian's, you know, like, it's not an organization, it's his university and his department. And they've been doing something very cool, like for the 30 days of Ramadan, they've been having conversations with like, you know, big name people. They're not just scholars, but they're different people that are significant in the Muslim world. But then scholars and Sami Al-Arian will have conversations with these individuals about their life. So he's going to get questions about like his early influences and his scholarship and his work, and you know, it's going to be a very interesting, like, personal conversation. So that's tomorrow morning, 10:30 Eastern time, and they're going to live stream it. So if you go to our social media, you can find the links for it, or you can also just search up Istanbul Zaim, Z-A-I-M, or the Center for Islamic and Global Affairs, or Sami Al-Arian. They also have like a Facebook presence and things like that. So join us for that. I'm sure they're also going to record it. So if you can't make it at that time, we'll share it on our social media so you can watch the recording afterwards.
It's called their second Ramadan series.
It's called their second Ramadan series. So, and if anyone has any questions, you can email any of us here. So we can, let you know. So, okay. It'll be very cool.
I just had a brief question about sources, because the narrations that you provide regarding historical, things, it really helps enlighten the commentary so much, and it develops the point so clearly. And I just wondered, are these prophetic narrations, or where are they coming from? Because they seem a bit out of reach and I'm wondering if they're prophetic narrations. How does that? It feels almost unfair to ask, but how does that work? Because is it like a direct kind of knowledge, or is it kind of conjecture, or and if it's not, where else in the tradition is it coming from, and then how do the commentators then decide which ones to use and to not use? Is it based off of chain of transmission, or what are they using to be able to come to that?
Can you paraphrase that?
Yeah, the question is about sources, and it's the sources, and it's especially in Surah Saba, it presents us with the issue of there's a reference to a civilization, and so the question is, well, are you using prophetic narrations, or basically how do you get the backdrop to Surah Saba? So there is a prophetic narration that gives us it's useful, but in an interesting way. The Prophet ﷺ is asked about Saba, and he is told, was Saba a kingdom, or was Saba a queen in that narration? And he says something to the effect that Saba was a lineage, and he names the names of I believe it was 10 tribes. That's the prophetic narration that we have, and so beyond that, then when I wanted to understand Ba'id Bayna Asfarina, one, you do a survey of all the Islamic sources, and the historical sources, like not like Tarikh al-Tabari or Tarikh Ibn Kathir, they give you information, but a lot of it is mythology mixed with history, so they sort of throw all the reports in. And what I found myself having to do with Surah Saba is that in wanting to understand Ba'id Bayna Asfarina, then I found these constant references in Islamic sources that clearly indicated a desire to monopolize wealth. But it would express it in ways that were, like the report that, or the narration that said that the rich people wanted to use cattle so that it becomes unaffordable to the more people with more moderate means, but that didn't jive with the historical record. So the more I researched what is available, there's a book, for instance, in English that was called Arabs in Late Antiquity, that I remember reading at the time. And there was even, I think there was a book called Arabs, The History of Arabs Before Islam. And there are a few good Arabic sources, among them an encyclopedic source that's downstairs called Tarikh Qaba'il al-Arab that goes into considerable detail because a lot of the Arab tribes that inhabited Arabia, Iraq, Bahrain, Jordan, Egypt came from the quote-unquote diaspora after the destruction of the dam of Yemen. And so what I found with Surah Saba is that I was reading a lot of historical sources trying to figure out what happened in the deterioration. What did this mean? بعد بين أسفارنا. What is it that they tried to achieve? And the other thing that was also clear as you looked into the development of events is that as Saba extended its colonies to, and especially the rich classes, created colonies in Sham, they started thinking of extending their trade to India and China. And the profits of extending the trade to India and China would have been monumental, but these trade routes were very insecure. But in order to get people to, they started forcing people to carry their products because they basically if then they were killed by highway robbers, it's not, yeah. So they were sacrificing human beings in order to reach trades in China, and so you sometimes in order to Surah Saba is a good example of a surah where there's a lot of scholarly research that went into understanding this particular issue of Surah Saba, because there's a lot of mythology, Arab mythology, and even I discovered that there's a lot of Abyssinian mythology about the empire of Saba and about Queen of Sheba in particular. At one point I was even started reading about the relationship between the early alphabet used by the people of Saba and the development of Arabic, which lent some very interesting insight. Because I wasn't planning to ever share any of this, I found myself that I was reading with a great deal of enthusiasm because I was just doing it for my own. And when you're not doing things, you're not worried about publishing anything or lecturing about anything, then you pursue your interests wherever they are. I even read a book about jinn locations in current day Yemen, and it was very fascinating because apparently there are towns in Yemen where Saba used to be that are, that people will not even go because they're known as horribly haunted and so on. I don't know what happened to them now, but yeah. So there are a few surah in the Quran. We'll talk about that because where things like that happen, where I've spent a lot of time reading what the mythology of the Old Testament, especially, and the Talmud was said about Queen of Sheba. I found a lot of it part of the delusions that Surah Saba itself was warning about, because it could easily suck you into these fantastical narratives that had nothing to do with anything. Um, so yeah.
Just following up on that issue, so does that mean that the people of Saba are al-Arab al-Ariba, and that because then the decline of Saba would coincide with when Ibrahim left Hajar and Ismail in Mecca, or is that not
No,
really good history?
it is both.
Paraphrase that follow-up question.
There, the history of okay, before I go, the history of Saba, the decline of Saba takes place about 500 years before the Prophet ﷺ. But the question about Al-Arab al-Arabi is that the Arabs are descendants of, what are the other group called?
Mustariba?
Mustariba. The sort of the two main groups that came from Yemen. Although now historians even cast doubt as to these two groups, but two main descendants of Yemeni tribes. But it's not. The decline of Saba is not at the time of Ismail, alayhi salam. The decline of Saba is well after that. The settlement of, although there are reports, which I don't believe, that the Saba, maybe I actually wrote it down, hold on, that they are descendants of, I might have, that they are descendants of, what's his name? Ibn Yashrib bin Ya'rib bin Qahtan bin Hud. They were the descendants of Hud. But when I researched that, it seemed very unlikely that they are the descendants of Hud.
Seemed strange to me that when we get to the story of Saba, that a flood came and then the flood caused gardens to produce fruits that are bitter and disgusting. Because, I mean, it seems more likely, if that's taken literally, that a flood would come and destroy the gardens and there wouldn't be any fruit. So then I wonder, do you think it's like in the shorter surahs when you would provide 3 different methodologies for interpreting it, is this grounds for it being interpreted more as a parable that describes, you're given something and when you forget that it ultimately comes from God, that even that thing becomes bitter, you lose enjoyment in it, much like in Surah Sad with Solomon when he was dead on the throne.
Yeah, I agree that's a really interesting point. In Sufi tafsirs, they say that the flood is symbolic for an excess of wealth, and that as you are gorged on wealth, you no longer enjoy anything. And as you no longer enjoy anything, you covet excess. You go for extremes. And they draw a comparison to the story of Jews and Moses when they told him, no, we want we miss the lesser fruits or the lesser things that we used to have in Egypt. That they're given a lot of bounties, but then they rebel against that wealth, and they start coveting or missing things that are less lucrative. With Surah Saba, the reason I didn't pause at that is because it's interesting that after the flood, one of the things that happens is, and I'm not sure about like precisely, is that apparently the land, I forgot the English word for it, salinates, or it becomes salty.
You're right, Solomon.
Yeah. And as the land salinates, the nature of the soil changes, and as the nature of the soil changes, the type of things that could grow changed, and there been we found archaeological evidence that, in fact, one of the things that initially the flood causes massive destruction, and a lot of people die and so on. But the bigger disaster is that the long term is that the soil itself becomes more salty, and the water becomes the constant, and then the water actually starts after the flood, initial flood. More of the water starts disappearing, and eventually, like if you go to these areas in Yemen now, it's all dried beds. You know, all the valleys are just completely dry. So it seemed like a systematic, consistent natural disaster. And there are enough references to the Quran that the destruction of the dam was divine punishment. Egyptians will hate me, but I think a similar wrath is going to befall Egypt with the Ethiopian dam. The Nile River will deteriorate, and then the land will salinate, and Egyptians are going to come upon very hard times. The blessings of Sisi.
Okay, any more questions here? Okay.
Is this interactive group or
Yeah,
yours?
but you go for it if you're, yeah, I was gonna start an interactive.
Mine is yesterday's question, just about
Oh, yeah.
Surah Al-Jinn. Should we save that for later?
We have one question about Surah Al-Jinn. Should we do
From
it now or
yesterday?
leave it from yesterday, what Rami was gonna ask you?
Ask it and then I'll decide.
About the shooting stars.
About the shooting stars.
Oh, what was the question?
You know how it mentions shuhub,
Yeah.
and the mufassirun say, oh, like shooting stars are what's striking down, but I mean it's problematic because it, you know, implies like a direction of the samawat and things like that.
Yeah,
Paraphrase, please.
okay, yeah, the question is from Surah
Jinn.
Jinn, where the Quran says that when the jinn try to eavesdrop, a shahab chases after them. And there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, it's attributed to the Prophet that he, according to the hadith, that he sees a shooting star, and he tells his companions, this is chasing a jinn or something to that effect. But it's not a very it's not a hadith of great authenticity. There's problems in its chain, so it's not. But interestingly, there are a lot of theologians who've actually written, who've commented about this, that we are told that in al-Mala' al-A'la that they're chased by a shihab. Now, a shihab could be a comet, could be an asteroid, could be an X-ray, could be an energy force, could be something. We just don't know. But just because we see something in the heavens, like a shooting star, can we say we are seeing something from al-Mala' al-A'la? And a lot of commentators said no, because you can't assume that you are seeing something in the Mala' al-A'la just because you see something in the sky above the earth. Which I think is very reasonable, because where is al-Mala' al-A'la? I believe it was Mutaridi who says it, because it's been a while since I've read this, but it says that, you stand on earth, you see something, you don't actually know where in the sky it's taking place, because it depends on, to situate anything in the heavens, you need to be able to read the position, the configuration of stars, and to read it in relation to where you are standing on Earth. And we have no indication that when we are gazing upon the sky and seeing all the stars and planets that we see, that we are seeing anything close to al-Mala' al-A'la, meaning the spheres of Allah. So, interestingly, other than the most literal folks, there was a healthy skepticism about just jumping to the conclusion that, I wouldn't teach our children that, look, a shooting star, there's a jinn being chased. that would not be a healthy way of doing it.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Khalid. Based on one of the final chapters of Reasoning with God and the commentary today on delusions of subservience, would you define self-preservation as an Islamic obligation to oneself?
Yes, but, keep in mind that when the Quran says, وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ, don't cast yourselves unto ruin. It makes that specific reference when it's telling us that the cast yourself unto ruin is by failing to spend in Allah's way. So, self-preservation, it has to be qualified with a considerable amount of that's one of the anything that has to do with the self, the challenge of the self, is one of the toughest challenges that all of us confront, because we're not objective when it comes to the self. And not only are we not objective, but it is our soft spot when it comes to shaitan. So the easy thing is, I see a gun and I decide to play Russian roulette with the gun, and a sense of self-preservation tells me don't do that. Don't put one bullet in the chamber and test your luck. Well, that's rather obvious, you know. And if I fail and I play Russian roulette and I kill myself, you know, I'm not going to have much of an excuse. But the problem, you know, beyond that silly example, the excuse of self-preservation, Ibn Taymiyyah actually says this in Minhaj al-Sunnah, has been used by the greatest minds to justify the most cowardly acts in history. Ibn Taymiyyah, at his time, the Mongols, after destroying Baghdad and massacring the people of Baghdad and massacring the people of Halab and massacring the people of Damascus, had nominally converted to Islam and were threatening to change the fabric of the religion itself. They were doing horrendous things while nominally Muslim. And he was extremely frustrated by how many Muslims were afraid, because the Mongols were horrible. They were bloodthirsty, they tortured and they killed and they imprisoned. And he was extremely frustrated by how many people around him used the excuse of self-preservation to do the cowardly thing and to fail to resist. And self-preservation also sometimes justifies people use it to justify the most stingy things. You know, so there are tons of people that live paycheck to paycheck, literally. They pay their bills, their bank account is zero, maybe even a little negative, and then, but there are people who have the same anxiety, if not worse, if they don't have regularly, you know, cushion of 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 50,000, 100,000. I've known families in California, their cushion, their safety net is a couple $1 million. You know, if it, well, you know, we can't break our, what do you call these things where you lock your money in?
So like CDs and
you know, because if we break the second million, then you know, human beings are capable of, and it's, you know, it's take yourself in isolation and just look deep into the mirror, and ask yourself that ultimate, you will die. Reflect upon death. Death is often the biggest somber thing that can awaken you. And are you really going to be able to defend your self-preservation after death? Whatever it is.
Okay. Sit down.
But by the way, academia, just since this is my field, I know a lot of my. I can sit here and tell you stories probably from now till the end of my life, of how many of my colleagues, I'm talking about Muslim colleagues, and even non-Muslims, the most cowardly things that they've done in the name of self-preservation. I mean, yeah, things that you wouldn't believe. It just, and it's sad because academics are supposed to represent something. But, you know, cowards before tenure remain cowards after tenure, because even after tenure, well, you know, we want to get to step 1, we want to get to step 2, we want to get to step 3, you know, there are 10 steps. And then when you get above step, meaning that you've gone through all your post-tenure promotions, where you're too old to matter. Khalas, life is over. And then it's like, well, you have buddies everywhere, and you know the provost is your friend, and the vice provost is your friend, and the dean of college is your friend, and you don't want to upset any of them because they're close to all of you, and so you just keep your mouth shut anyway. And yeah, I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that I was told, well, I'm just waiting for tenure, and you wait, I'm gonna speak the truth after tenure. And 90, and sadly, I mean, I'm really sad to say this, believe me, I'm honestly sad. 95% of the time, it's an absolute hogwash. Bravery just never comes.
Okay. Somewhere I was taught that Allah destroys a civilization if there are no believers. Were there any believers from the civilization of Saba?
No, it's not. It's not. I know what you're referring to. That Allah could save a nation, a people, a tribe, because of the few pious ones. It actually the first, you know, it comes from the story of Sodom, where the in the biblical tradition, the angels tell the prophet, well, you know, find a single just person or find a few just people and we won't destroy Sodom, and he's unable to find them. And that tradition then has an Islamic version that God, but in the Islamic version it is said in the tentative sense that it is possible that God would not send God's wrath upon a people for the few pious individuals in that society. But on the other hand, we have a lot of ahadith that when Allah's wrath befalls a people, it often is not just the unjust that will suffer because of that. And the most famous hadith of that is the one that probably most of us have heard about, the parable of people in a ship, and some people start digging a hole in the bottom of the ship, and the people on the upper deck of the ship don't stop them from doing so, and as a result, when the ship sinks, all of them will drown. The people who are guilty, and this, of course, this parable is from the Prophet ﷺ. I gave a khutbah about that parable a long time ago. But put it this way, if Allah doesn't destroy a people because of the pious minority, it is an act of grace. It is out of Allah's mercy. It is a gift, not a right. And at what point do people deserve punishment in this earth? Allahu A'lam. I mean, but one thing for sure, God gives people ample opportunities to reform and to change. And a lot of times when I see what we've done, what some Muslim countries have done with oil money, I often wonder at the point at which chances run out, because the abuses have continued now for decades. But God is patient and merciful, and you know, so from the 30s till today, although we've seen horrible abuses, God continues to give people a chance.
Okay, I have one last question, and it's from me. in response to the Ibn Ajiba, I think that you were talking about the story about how when people have hollowness and they don't fill it with God, that the shaitan sees it as a play area. And also when you were talking in the beginning of the surah about people who are obstructionist and tend to sort of be very skeptical and deny, things. So sort of putting those two things together, I know there are people, like other people have written and things like that, people who are skeptical of the impact of shaitan. And they like don't believe in maybe what we call devil attacks, right? Or the active engagement of, the unseen and all of this. And they think it's just like people making bad decisions. Is that is that kind of a sign of either lack of faith or, when you're just, you don't believe it, or like too much rationality.
Surah Saba itself, I didn't cover these verses, but where shaitan, I don't want to recite the entire surah because a lot of times I have a hard time remembering if it's not in order. Where is it? Okay, I'm gonna interest. So I'm just gonna put where Allah reminds us that إن كيد الشيطان ضعيف, and those I'll translate in a second. That those who shaitan's sultan, shaitan's authority over human beings is by exploiting their own will, their own energy. It's literally, sometimes when I was much younger, the little martial arts that I took, the thing that stuck in my mind is that how you use your opponent's energy to defeat your opponent. Like, because I remember, I asked the karate teacher who wanted me to fight some guy who was much bigger than I am. He's so much bigger, what can I do? And he said, well, you just use his energy against him. Shaitan uses you against you. And in fact, as the Prophet ﷺ says, that flows, shayateen, the demons, flow or are as close to you as, or flow or interact with you like the blood flows in your vein. So one of the biggest problems for someone who says, I believe, is when they are anchored only in alam shahada, in the world of the seen. Because they're anchored in the material world. So they live in the 5% and they're unable to imagine when they are in a room like this room that we're in right now. They actually find it really difficult to imagine that this very room that we're in is filled with things that are not human. And it is filled with things that are not human. If only they could see. If only they could see. I mean, if the folks, the few of them that are actually legitimate, who can see paranormal things, and you bring them in a room and they start telling you about stuff they see, whether they understand what they see or not. The reality is, they'll be the first to tell you that there's very little space that you can step into that is not full of things. Now, what do you do about someone that says, well, I believe, but I only want to acknowledge the material world in which I exist? See how often the Quran, how often Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us about the shayateen, about demons. If you say no, they don't have an impact, then you're literally saying to what percentage of the Quran I don't believe. It's a reality. Now, it doesn't mean that we are at their mercy, but it means that they have a vested interest in. They are, as Allah tells us, sworn enemies of humankind. And Allah tells us what? Shaitan is your enemy, so consider Shaitan an enemy. فَاتَّخُذُوهُ عَدُوًّا. So someone who says, well, I don't want to think of Shaitan, and I don't want to think of the impact of Shaitan, then they're not taking on Shaitan as an enemy. And that is a necessary step, a necessary part of developing the type of relationship with Allah, because you can only, as I said many times before, beauty is only understood in relation to ugliness. Light is only understood in relation to darkness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is only understood in relation to the opposite of Allah, what Allah is. So if you do not understand Shaitan, then you can't understand Allah. It's the same way, can you understand light without understanding darkness? I don't want to think about the darkness. Well, then you'll never understand what light is.
Thank you, alhamdulillah. I think we're out of time, and on that note,
Tarawih prayer.
okay, we're gonna do Taraweeh tonight. We've been late, it's already almost 11, it's 5 to 11. We still have to have some dinner very quickly, inshallah, and then we will get online for Taraweeh if anyone is able to join, okay?
11:30?
We'll shoot for 11:30, I don't
No,
know.
we have to.
They'll get an email.
Okay, people will get an email.
Okay.
Okay, we're shooting for 11:30. Pray for us. No, we always are take a little longer than we think we will.
No, 11:30.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Okay. Thank you for being with us, and great to see everybody. Inshallah, we will see you on Tuesday. Assalamu alaikum.